From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
A word often used in connection with Congressman Joe Kennedy is legacy. The newly minted U.S. representative from the 4th District of Massachusetts is the son of former Congressman Joe Kennedy and the grandson of the late Robert F. Kennedy. The name may have helped him during campaign season, but now that the job is his, Kennedy's actions will be more important than legacy. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, U.S. Congressman Joe Kennedy.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, Rhode Island Public Radio's political reporter Ian Donis and WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the program.
Morning.
Morning. Congressman, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us on the program.
It's a pleasure.
Before we get going, I want to bring up a map of your district so people can get an idea of the shape of it,
Great.
where it is, and how it abuts Rhode Island. This is the map here. The green area is the 4th District of Massachusetts. It stretches from Brookline, where you live, correct?
Yep.
And it goes down to Attleboro through Taunton and part of Fall River. This is a newly shaped district, one that was once held by Congressman Barney Frank. And you can see it really covers the eastern side of Rhode Island. You're a freshman congressman in the minority party down in Washington, D.C. What has surprised you most about the job so far?
Well, it is a newly shaped district, obviously, and it's been represented in the past by recent past by 4 different congressmen in Massachusetts who really have just set the bar so unbelievably high for constituent services. Between Congressman Frank, who had about 60% of the district and really legendary for the services that he would provide. Congressman Jim McGovern, that had a lot of that Rhode Island border area that you're talking about. Also Congressman Richard Neal and Congressman Stephen Lynch, who Massachusetts is so fortunate to be able to have as members of our delegation really leading the way. So part of the challenge that we've faced just from the very beginning is trying to get our district offices up and running and trying to be able to provide that same level of constituent service to the residents of the 4th District that they've come to enjoy and really deserve. So we've had a big focus on that, and then also focusing just trying to get my feet underneath me and the staff built up in Washington, D.C., which it has been a bit of a whirlwind at times, but starting at least at this point now, we were down there for much of the past month actually in session. So getting into the flow of it certainly a bit more, and at least now I can figure out how to get from my office to the Capitol.
Well,
It took a little while to figure out.
At the beginning, you had high hopes that everyone could come together down there, and I can tell you, when we have the Rhode Island delegation on this program, they all talk about how divisive it is in Washington, D.C. Now that a few months are under your belt, what is your assessment? Is everyone getting along down there, or is it as divisive as advertised by your colleagues from Rhode Island?
You know, I think there are some broad areas of agreement. There's some broad areas of disagreement as well. And you learn pretty quickly that it is a diverse country. It's a big country, and people aren't going to agree on everything. And that in and of itself is okay. I think that the challenge is there really a desire to compromise and recognize that the people that I represent in the 4th District in Massachusetts, the prescriptions for what might drive our economy might be different from what somebody representing parts of the Midwest or the Southwest or even California might be. So that disagreement in and of itself is fine. The challenge is to say, okay, well, is there a real initiative or a drive to come together and try to find ways to compromise? And I think that particularly amongst our freshman class, there has been. You've seen, we've gotten to know each other, I think, pretty well. I've been nothing but impressed with the caliber of my fellow classmates, both Democrats and Republicans alike. Couldn't be friendlier, very much accomplished people that are really trying to do what's best for their districts, but want to find a way to move the country forward. One gentleman who I've actually kind of struck up a bit of a friendship with, a man from North Carolina, Robert Pittenger. He and I, if you looked at our policies and kind of what we believe in, you probably couldn't get further apart. But over a number of the orientations and the breakfasts and lunches that you have together, you find that he would keep coming back and say, hey, what about this, or what about that, or what about this? And it turns out that after about a week, we found out he was an active member in his church. He's a Presbyterian. has done a number of international missions abroad and is very devoted to international human rights. And so you say, okay, well.
One of the big contributors to gridlock is how a lot of Republicans feel like they have more of an incentive to dig in their heels than collaborate because they're mostly worried about a challenge from the right. How does Congress as an institution move past that?
I think that is a real concern, and I think that, but it's a real concern, I think, for a subset of members in the Republican Party. I've talked to a number of Republicans. The guy next door to me is a Republican. The guy across the hall from me is a Republican. They continue to reach out. They continue to offer to point you in the right direction. And there is a real, I think, desire to try to find ways to work together. There are some in the Republican Party that have, I think, believe that these continuing to govern by crisis, to have these manufactured and man-made crises about the debt limit and the fiscal cliff, sequestration, the continuing resolution, to continue to put these in because each time you run up to crisis is an opportunity to dig your
but
heels in.
Democrats voted for sequestration as well. I mean, you can't put all that on the GOP.
No. And I don't put it all on the GOP. The point, though, is that I think most of my fellow Democrats, and I think a good number actually of those across the aisle, actually want to find a way to, rather than having these manufactured crises happen every 6 months, to say, okay, well, let's go big. Let's try to find a real solution that's going to give the business community, businesses big and small, the clarity that they need about the tax code, about the debt ceiling, so that the government's not going to default on our loans and our credit. But continuing to only kick that 2 or 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time, 6 months at a time, that is not a big solution. It doesn't solve that uncertainty issue, which is what so many businesses and families talk to me about every day.
You talk a lot, Congressman, about your family's legacy and also how you're your own man. One thing that people might not think of, I remember Congressman Patrick Kennedy, your cousin, our former congressman here in Rhode Island, there was a lot of pressure on him early in his congressional career to raise money, to go out and campaign for other people, to be zipping all over the country. I'm sure you're already getting that based on what I'm hearing out of Washington. How are you dealing with that pressure, and how are you going to deal with it?
Well, I think getting some advice from some of my family members. Patrick has been a huge mentor to me, not just since I started running for office and in office, but long beforehand. Also talking to some family friends, those that have been in office and I think have served well. I think there's one of the greatest challenges you have early on in office is recognizing that you have tremendous demands on your time, from legislative efforts in Washington to demands in the districts to trying to help out other members of Congress. However, you were elected to serve the people of the district that elected you. And I am here and I serve at the pleasure of the people of the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts. That is priority one. That will always be priority one. And so that is certainly going to remain my absolute first priority, and my first obligation is to be home, be around the district, try to provide that level of constituent service that we spoke about earlier, and serve them as best of my abilities.
What other advice did you get from your father, who was a congressman? Patrick was a congressman. What did they tell you about how to make this work?
You know, one of the some consistent advice that I've heard from everybody, from members of my family to other Democrats, and even Republican leadership, who I sat down with a couple of them recently and just asked for their advice. They said, your allies on one cause might be your adversaries on another, even in the same day, and that there's a lot of complicated issues, there's different interests. Treat everybody with respect, work hard, do your homework, be nice when you can, and try to not take everything personally. And if you do that, you're going to be fine.
Your cousin Patrick Kennedy now lives in New Jersey. Do you see any chance that he might run for elective office again one day?
I haven't talked to Patrick about it. Probably a question best left for him. I know he's dedicated to public service. He obviously served for a number of years in elected office. He's really energized and devoted himself to this organization, One Mind, and expanding research on the brain. And it's something that he's been one of his pet causes from the time that he was in office, and certainly something that he's championing now. And I'm really, really proud of him and what he's accomplished and what the agenda that he set for that organization.
Congressman, the current national minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. You want to eventually raise it to $10.10 an hour, higher than even what the president wants, which I think is what, $8? How do you sell that to struggling small businesses in your district?
I think it's a great question, and it is something that I believe passionately in, that we have to make sure that folks that are working for minimum wage can actually afford to live. There's studies that show that in order for somebody who's earning minimum wage now to realistically afford a 2-bedroom apartment, they'd have to work 120 hours a week. That's just, there's no way that you can actually get by and meet the obligations of providing for your family.
Isn't that more of a housing problem?
Well, no, it's both. I mean, it's a housing issue, yes, but certainly income comes into it. So I think part of the challenge here is to recognize that businesses are what drive our economy and what enable us to actually have the revenues to actually fund these other programs that I and so many other people believe in. So we have to create a strong environment for our businesses to succeed. That means lowering the cost of doing business. I think the debate on the minimum wage is exactly the wrong place to be putting it, where we're saying we're going to ask people that are low income, that are working 60 hours a week, to pay less in order to subsidize businesses, the cost of doing business. What we need to do is keep tax rates low, get the cost of energy down, and streamline regulation so that businesses aren't forced to try to make up that difference by cutting wages. So that's really where the focus should be, trying to take it out on hardworking, low-income Americans to subsidize big business.
So should minimum
exactly
wage going up be tied to all those things that you talked about? Raise the minimum wage only if?
No. So the minimum wage, if we look at where the minimum wage was back in the 1960s, if we had indexed it to inflation then, it would be over $10.50 already today. The fact of the matter is that low-wage earners have been subsidized in the business community now for decades, and it's time that they deserve to be able to earn a living given the hard work that they're doing every day.
Another business been in the news lately, Texas Instruments. My old colleague Rick Foster at the Sun Chronicle did a really eye-opening piece about Texas Instruments was the fabric of Attleboro, right embedded there, and cancer rates have been high, and there's concern among the workers there. I know you've been looking at that already in your first couple months. What have you seen, and what's going on with that?
Absolutely, and that's a great point. Texas Instruments was a very proud employer and still looked at very fondly by the residents of Attleboro. Took over a plant that back in the 1950s and 60s had been used as a nuclear weapons facility. There have been alarming increases in cancer rates for individuals that worked in that facility, and the Attleboro Sun Chronicle brought that to the forefront recently. It just so happened that the day that they published that article, I think a day or two before, the head of Texas Instruments, the chairman and CEO, happened to be before our Science and Technology Committee to testify about the importance of government funding for basic research. I was then asked the chairman when he was there about their efforts, and they've since sent out a letter to workers. We've been working closely with them and the Department of Labor. We've got a town hall that we're trying to schedule in the upcoming weeks to try to bring together TI, the Department of Energy that also administers part of this fund to provide health resources to workers and their families, and the Department of Labor so that we can really get the word out to the community.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. Congressman, you are on the Foreign Affairs Committee along with Congressman David Cicilline. When we come back, we're going to ask him about what's going on in North Korea. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ian Donis and Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Congressman from the 4th District of Massachusetts, Joe Kennedy. Congressman, as I mentioned before the break, you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as is Congressman David Cicilline. We tape this program on a Friday morning. News that North Korea's leader says his rockets are ready to, quote, settle accounts with the U.S. because the U.S. flew some B-2 bombers in South Korea. Do Kim Jong-un's actions concern you, or do you think this is posturing?
I think it's obviously concerning to the United States. It's concerning to the entire international community. Now, there's been these scheduled exercises with the South Koreans that the United States does periodically. Clearly, the rhetoric of the North Koreans have escalated dramatically in recent days and weeks. Cutting off communication with South Korea is an alarming escalation as well. It's something that certainly those of us on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm on the Terrorism, Trade, and Nonproliferation Subcommittee, this is certainly something we're looking at very carefully. One of the hearings we had recently was on dedicated to North Korea and really how North Korea is able to fund their regime through arms deals, counterfeiting, organized crime. So we've got a number of tactics that we can take to try to increase the isolation of North Korea, to make sure that the leadership there understands that we are going to protect our allies, that nuclear war is not something to joke about with the United States or anyone. And to really reach out even further to
Do you
China.
think he is using it as a prop? You say it's not something to joke about.
Well, I don't think escalating rhetoric, I don't think nuclear tests is what that region needs at the moment. Certainly it's always, tensions have been high, running high for a long time. But there's a newly elected president in South Korea, Kim Jong-un, is in his early 30s as well, just been appointed the leader of one of the nations with one of the biggest militaries in the world and a nuclear arsenal. The leadership in China just went through a change. So this is really where I think we can expect and to see that the old experienced hand in all of this amongst everyone here is the Obama administration and Congress. And I think you're seeing some strong leadership there to really try to stabilize the situation and say, hey, cooler heads need to prevail.
Closer to home, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe wants to build a casino in your district. Due to a 2009 case involving Rhode Island's former governor, Don Carcieri, the tribe might need an act of Congress to build a casino. Do you support legislation that would enable the tribe to do that?
So my stance on casinos, it's a great question. My district, as you pointed out earlier with the map, is potential sites for about 4 different casinos between Milford, Taunton, Fall River, Raynham, and even Plainville, different slot machine potential.
Can stop at each one on district
Yes,
tours.
exactly right. So it's certainly a big issue for the district, and my approach has been and will continue to be, this really needs to be driven by the local communities. And if it's the plans that the developers put together have the support of the local communities, then that's something I'm happy to support. I think the tribe has worked very well with Taunton. Mayor Hoy in Taunton, his administration, and the people of Taunton overwhelmingly support the proposal at this point. So it's certainly something that I'm happy to support. With regards to those other areas, again, it's too early to tell. And my message to anybody that's looking to actually get into the casino area or casino business in this district is, it's got to be driven by the local community. So get out there and start talking.
Massachusetts is about to pursue a big expansion of casino gambling. How do you respond to those people who say that casinos and that form of gambling are essentially a wealth transfer from people who are not particularly good at math?
Well, I think, again, this is where it's all going to depend on the type of negotiation and the deal that is provided to the local community. If such a proposal is put in place where that money is basically going to be a transfer from those in the local community to some big casino dealership or some big casino magnate and have those funds go elsewhere, then that's not something I'm going to support. If those revenues are used to really direct community investment to support local initiatives, then that is something that I think.
But aren't the losers in gambling really the working class people who might not know that they have little chance of winning?
Well, there has to be, I think most people understand when they go into a casino that there is a real risk, and that's why it's in fact gambling. But I do think that there does, in the midst of any of these projects, have to be mitigation components to it. There has to be counseling that's put in place. There has to be warnings and additional measures to make sure that there are safeguards and that this doesn't just end up being a wealth transfer from those that might not have all that much disposable income to funding big casinos.
Congressman, you and Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick are both proponents of the South Coast Rail Project.
Absolutely.
Which would bring train service down into Fall River, New Bedford. I've been writing about this for years, and people were writing about it for years before me. Every governors and congressmen in this area always say they want it, but there's never any trains, especially with federal austerity coming on. Is there really isn't this just a slogan for you guys when you're down in Fall River, New Bedford? How do you ever see an actual practical plan to get those trains?
Absolutely not. And I think this is a priority for me. It's a priority for the governor. It's a priority for the people of the 4th District, and it's a priority for Massachusetts. So I applaud the governor. Obviously, this is a proposal that has been out there for a long time. But Governor Patrick has really made it a priority for his administration. Obviously, he unveiled an ambitious transportation plan. South Coast Rail is a big part of that development. It's something whose time has come. This is not just a major economic development project for the South Coast. It also is, in my mind anyway, an issue of social justice and economic justice. Other areas of the state are getting connected to Boston and to the markets in Boston. That you're seeing a link that's going to hopefully come online later this spring and summer for summer service down to Hyannis, which is great, and I support that. You've seen expansion.
You are Kennedy.
To get around that traffic would be great. Unfortunately, haven't been able to spend all that much time on the Cape in the past couple of years. Life's been busy.
You missed Taylor Swift.
We're not going there. But the linkage between providing access to the markets in Boston is an extraordinarily important link, and really a way to, you touched on housing earlier, to reduce some of the housing pressure that we're seeing in Boston. As the economy starts to come back, there's huge pent-up demand for housing in the greater Boston area. Allowing for commuter rail stops further out provides the opportunity for affordable housing and for people to access the markets and not get priced out and end up moving off to states in the Southwest where they can get much cheaper land and have access to markets and an easier commute. So this is a great economic development plan. I think studies show that it's going to add about $500 million a year to our GDP, our state economy, and it's something that I wholeheartedly support.
And now a question you're probably not excited to answer. Can you see your dad running for mayor of Boston?
I haven't talked to my dad about that at all. I think that's a question, again, probably best left for him.
You know, you're pretty close to him, so
I am pretty
it's a
close
valid
to him.
question.
I think my dad, I'm very proud of the work that he does with Citizens Energy. I'm proud of what he accomplished when he was in office. He is dedicated to public service, and I think he will always be in public service.
Let me ask you about that Citizens Energy. You know, the late Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, had a tense relationship with the United States. I think that puts it mildly. But he was a big donor to that nonprofit, which provides heating oil assistance to those in the Northeast. How do you square that with people? Do you have a different view of Chavez than maybe most Americans do, which, let's face it, isn't flattering?
I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. One is that my father, every year with the Citizens Oil Heat Program, would go to every major oil company in the country and ask for their support for that program so that low-income families could be able to heat their homes through the dead of winter.
What was the response?
All of them but one said no. Every single year, Citgo was the only company that would respond. And my dad, every year, would go back to the same executives, giving them an opportunity to support low-income families, and they would always say no. The oil heat program has expanded. It now goes almost nationwide. It's in over a dozen states across the country. And when I'm going around talking to folks, when people ask me about that program, they say, "Tell your dad thank you." So it's something that I know my dad is very proud of, and I'm proud of him for the work that he's done, making sure folks can get through winter.
And the relationship with the Venezuelan president, has that provided any difficulty for you, maybe out in the campaign trail?
Again, the only comments that I ever hear about it are people, and it actually happens quite frequently, where they will come up after an event and just kind of pull you aside and say, thanks.
Okay.
Conservatives are offering a lot of doom and gloom scenarios about how the Affordable Care Act, championed by your great uncle Ted Kennedy, will hurt small business. Do you find any validity to those arguments?
I think we've got to remember, the short answer is no in the long run. There's a lot of discussion about how healthcare costs continue to rise, and that the premiums that small businesses face continue to rise. That's because healthcare costs continue to rise, which is why we need the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act never was promised to alleviate the issues of healthcare costs overnight. What the Affordable Care Act actually does is start to institute the systemic change to be able to get the rate of increase for healthcare costs under control. That'll bend the cost curve down. So that's done through moving to an accountable care organization model, moving off a fee-for-service based system where providers are compensated based on the number of procedures they prescribe rather than the quality of care that's delivered. Incentivizing wellness, incentivizing prevention, and trying to make sure that we're treating chronic conditions before they start and take hold. All of these incentive programs are what's built into the Affordable Care Act. It's going to take some time, but you got to get people covered in order to get these initiatives put in place, because let's face it, a lot of folks that weren't covered were young, healthy individuals that didn't feel like they needed coverage until they had that accident or until there was some sort of catastrophic injury, when they would go to a hospital and couldn't pay their bill, and we all paid anyway. So this is an extraordinarily important bill. It's complex, it's complicated. There are going to be some hiccups along the way, but It is a necessary bill and one that I'm proud to support.
Congressman, you were sworn in the same day. I was down there in Washington with Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was actually your professor at Harvard Law. And as I learned while I was there, her class turned out to be kind of important for you, huh?
Yes, in a couple of ways. I met my wife in her class, first day. And
she said you sat. She sat in the front. You sat in the back.
I tried to sit in the back, and it turns out there was a seating chart, and I ended up getting seated up front, which was a terrifying moment for me. I was the first person she called on, and let's just say, to put it mildly, I didn't have the right answer. So Professor Warren, Elizabeth, now Senator Warren, has instilled in me that moment that you never come to class unprepared. And I will say, she was our contract professor. 2 years later, I took bankruptcy law because she was such an incredible professor. She, in a school that really focuses on these higher levels of law and almost legal philosophy, she always brought it down to how the law was affecting an individual and a person, and that there were people behind those cases. An incredible lesson for me to learn, obviously, starting out as a lawyer.
Congressman, 30 seconds left. You and your wife have a dog named Banjo?
Yes, we do.
Where did you get that?
We that was a consequence of me running around quite a bit for the past year, and she's saying, if you're gone, I'm going to get a dog. So, it's a rescue dog from Tennessee, hence Banjo. He's pretty cute. I think he's pretty cute. He likes my wife more than me. But,
just very quickly, are you running for president in 2016?
No. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for watching Newsmakers. Our
much,
guest was U.S. Congressman Joe Kennedy for Ted Nesi and Ian Donis. I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.
But you didn't rule out 2020, then.
Yeah.